Welcome back, everybody, to the David Pakman Show. Luke Beasley here, filling in. Quite the Friday show ahead of us. Let's dive right into it. Vice President Kamala Harris held a joint press conference, delivered remarks with President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. And I will play clips from that. Then notably, what I want to get to is Laura Ingraham on Fox News struggling to respond to the remarks that were delivered and saying something so bonkers, it's going to be hard for you to believe. Let's get to that. But first, for context, here is Vice President Harris with Volodymyr Zelensky.
As I have made clear on our 6 previous meetings and throughout Putin's brutal aggression and war against Ukraine, my support for the people of Ukraine is unwavering. I've been proud to stand with Ukraine. I will continue to stand with Ukraine, and I will work to ensure Ukraine prevails in this war. To be safe, secure, and prosperous, the United States must continue to fulfill our long-standing role of global leadership. We must stand with our allies and our partners. We must defend our democratic values and stand up to aggressors. And we must stand for international order, rules, and norms. Each one of these principles is at stake in Ukraine. And that is why Ukraine's fight matters to the people of America.
Given our understanding of this invasion by Russia into Ukraine, trying to take over sovereign territory by force, you would think that this would be a unifying message from Harris. You'd think that Fox News wouldn't have much to take issue with, but if you've kept up with American politics long enough, you know they'll take issue with absolutely anything. Then just one more clip before getting to that.
Putin started this war, and he could end it tomorrow if he simply withdrew his troops from Ukraine's sovereign territory. Of course, he has demonstrated no intention of doing that. Instead, he continues to assault civilian infrastructure and terrorize the people of Ukraine. In Switzerland in June, along with 90 other nations at the Ukraine Peace Conference, I told you that the United States shares your vision for the end of this war, an end based on the will of the people of Ukraine and the UN Charter, and that we must work with the international community to secure a just and lasting peace. And I told world leaders there, nothing about the end of this war can be decided without Ukraine.
You know, it's interesting. One of the things that MAGA folks have used, one of the terms they've used to constantly, like I said, take issue with anything that Biden has done as it relates to Ukraine, any of the stances that Vice President Harris has articulated on this issue or other foreign policy issues. They'll just say, oh, well, we just want peace. We want peace. They want war. We want peace. But as we saw, and we'll talk about this later in the show, in Trump's press conference at Trump Tower yesterday, it's actually not meaningful to use that term if you don't have any path to it. If you can't explain the details of how you're going to get there in a way that is just, then you're just throwing out a term for throwing out that term's sake. And that's what we see over and over again, where Harris is explaining in supporting Ukraine, we're attempting to show Putin he's not going to be able to accomplish the things that he wants to. His aggression is not going to achieve the goals that he set out to achieve. And so the only thing he can do is agree to a just peace. And we'll talk more about refuting these talking points after checking in on Laura Ingraham's reaction. Think about, if you've been watching my show, Luke Beasley, on YouTube, go subscribe, or David's show, you've seen for months before Harris, years before Harris dropped off, or before Harris became the top of the ticket and Biden dropped off the ticket, Fox News did 24/7 coverage of how Biden is Satan. He's the worst president in the history of our country, as Trump says, even though he's had a pretty successful presidency. And they would lead their viewers to believe there's nobody worse than Joe Biden. But the unthinkable has happened. And that's what you're going to see playing out here. Laura Ingraham now strangely, inconceivably arguing that Biden's a better candidate than Harris. You know that Biden made the right decision if this is what Fox News is saying.
She can read teleprompters, but is this really that convincing?
By the way there, Laura Ingraham's earring going, I don't want to have any part of this, and jumping off her face.
She can read teleprompters, but is this really that convincing? Today she sounded like she was doing her best Liz Cheney. Let's go to war impersonation.
There are some in my country who would instead force Ukraine to give up large parts of its sovereign territory, who would demand that Ukraine accept neutrality. These proposals are the same of those of Putin. They are proposals for surrender, which is dangerous and unacceptable.
Yes, and I found my earring. All right, in other words, if Kamala wins, we're going to war with Russia, period, full stop.
The in other words is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. In other words, she wants to nuke the entire world. That's kind of what she said, right?
If she sat down with an interview with any competent person in 5 minutes, I think he or she could force her into a corner, saying, Madam Vice President, if it's clear that Ukraine has no real chance of prevailing against Putin, as it increasingly looks like, do you intend to escalate the conflict, even if that means putting American soldiers at risk in a war with Russia? Yes or no, ma'am? On all of these issues, she is far worse than Biden. At least Biden had his own views on issues like foreign policy. And remember, he slow-walked the shipment of F-16s over to Zelensky. Her language today, though, was far more bellicose than Biden's ever was. And that's just because she's a puppet of the war caucus. She doesn't care if we go to war with Russia or not. So we'll see where things end up on election night. But right now, it seems the Democrats' trade of Biden for Kamala was a really, really dumb move.
Sure. Go look at the polling shift since Harris became the nominee and try to make that argument. But the graphic they're saying should have stuck with Joe. Can you imagine? Can you imagine Fox News being put in a place where now they're arguing, we want Biden back? And we've seen this. They're sort of taking Trump's lead, which is at rally after rally, he's been complaining that Biden had to drop off the ticket. He's been saying, but people voted for him and we spent so much money lying about him. I mean, campaigning against him. And it's a very strange thing to do when you only have mere days to the election. Maybe, I hate to give you advice, but maybe strategically it'd be better for you to focus on running against the person that you're running against instead of wishing that you were running against someone different. But of course, when she says that Harris is speaking way more aggressively about Ukraine, the language is nearly identical to that of Biden's on Ukraine because it's the correct stance that she's explaining. And the desperation is just oozing out of these segments as she fabricates her own version of reality. The lower third Chiron said, Kamala the Warhawk. If you think us not involving ourselves militarily, but giving aid to Ukraine so they can defend themselves, so that Russia doesn't think it can keep aggressing and keep preventing peace, is a stance of a war hawk, I think you're misusing that term to say the least. And of course, what is Laura Ingraham's stance then? They act like there's some solid, just peace deal on the table between Russia and Ukraine when, yeah, Putin will have peace if it means he gets handed everything he wants. And then whatever line is drawn, all right, you get this territory or this territory, or this territory. Putin has shown he won't stop there. That's the history of the last couple decades. So all you're saying is you want a moment of peace, a loss of sovereignty, a loss of territory, just so we can go through all of this again. Instead of putting a stop to this, showing Putin, you can't aggress. Sorry, you can't do it. No longer. That's the path to lasting peace, despite Laura Ingraham trying to portray Vice President Harris as a war hawk, even though when she says, I bet Harris couldn't answer a question about, are you going to involve U.S. soldiers in direct conflict with Russia? I bet Harris could never answer such a question. Yeah, she can. She has. Biden has. The administration's stance hasn't changed on that. We're not getting into direct military conflict with Russia. Here's just a little bit more when she brings on Kevin McCarthy, which, what are you doing, Kevin? No one wants to hear from you anymore.
Well, again, it seems to me that this was such a big, risky move to dump Biden. But they thought they were being really clever and really smart. But the metrics that we just went through a few of them tonight. We'll see what happens on election night. But this is, if they think this was some big slam dunk, this three-dimensional chess, I am not seeing it. I think Biden would have been a much better candidate. Mr. Speaker, yes or no?
Oh, exactly, yes. He showed that he was a better candidate.
Think about how much Vice President Harris's candidacy has broken the brains of Trump, who keeps ranting about, no one leaves my crowds, no one leaves my crowds, no one leaves my crowds. I promise everyone loves me, everyone loves me. He can't get off of that. He clearly, the debate and on, has had his brain broken by Harris. Not to mention even before saying that she turned black and all that crazy stuff. Then Fox host Kevin McCarthy here, all being impacted so severely mentally by Harris's candidacy and her momentum that they're put in a place where they're going on TV and arguing that the guy they said was the worst, most incompetent, terrible, satanic person ever was a better candidate. And it's not just that. I've covered over on my show, Laura Ingraham getting mad at Harris for hugging people, for smiling, and for laughing. When you start arguing against joy, laughter, one person on a Fox News panel literally said, I'm annoyed that Harris keeps using the term joy. You've taken a wrong turn somewhere, and I can't exactly help you out with that. But all of this, them doing the unthinkable, arguing in favor of Biden all of a sudden after years of saying he's the worst, is just a sign that this was the right decision. Otherwise, they wouldn't be panicking over it. And you also had in the same monologue this point.
Adams may be guilty, may not be guilty. That's up for a jury to decide. But the fact that so many are questioning the government's motives here is itself an indictment of the Biden-Harris administration.
So now you have MAGA arguing that the indictment of a Democratic mayor for corruption charges, campaign finance violations, getting money from foreign sources, allegedly, that may have been an example of the weaponized DOJ. But everyone, hold your horses. Didn't you say the proof of the weaponization was that only Republicans were targeted? But then you had Bob Menendez, you had Hunter Biden, now you have Eric Adams, who are all Democrats. And you're saying, no, but see, it's still because of reasons. Trump at his press conference said because Eric Adams said something that was not to Biden's liking on immigration. If you have to bend yourself into that many pretzels to defend your stance, you might just have the wrong stance. And since we're talking about Harris's laying out of specifics and being clear on her stance on Ukraine, at this press conference I've referenced now a couple times, Trump was much more vague.
Situation.
Do you believe that Ukraine should turn over some of its own land to Russia in order to end the war?
We'll see what happens.
And again, we'll dive more into his responses on things like that in a different segment. Much more after a quick break.
One of our sponsors today is Zippix Nicotine Toothpicks. Zippix brings you a convenient alternative to smoking and vaping. End the vape clouds, the ashtrays, the thing in your lip that people can see. I've seen that around. This is an easier and less messy way to curb the cravings, and you can use Zippix just about anywhere. Zippix is available in 6 flavors with 2 or 3 milligram strength. The nicotine and the flavor are long-lasting, and Zippix has helped countless people kick the bad habits, and they are bad habits. Zippix toothpicks are FDA registered. Their customer service is second to none. It is one of the most cost-effective alternatives. Also, check out their B12 and caffeine toothpicks. See for yourself why so many people have switched to Zippix toothpicks. You can only get Zippix online. Go to zippixtoothpicks.com today. Save 10% with the code PACMAN10 at checkout. Just remember, you must be 21 or older to order. The link is down below.